As we know, not everyone is a survivor. 1 in 8 female suicides or suicide attempts occur as a direct result of domestic abuse. Now, shockingly, more victims take their own lives than are killed by their tormentors. I recently met 2 mums who are campaigning for a better understanding of the issue. Now, before we watch, I've just got to give you a warning that this following film does contain conversations around suicide. An estimated 3 women die every week from suicide after experiencing domestic abuse. 2 people who know this pain all too well are Phyllis Daly and Sharon Holland. Sharon's daughter Chloe took her own life in 2023, aged just 23, after experiencing a campaign of physical and coercive abuse at the hands of her partner, Mark Masterton. Meanwhile, Phyllis's daughter Jessica was found dead at her home in 2018, aged 34. An inquest into her death found that a history of domestic abuse, as well as a history of anxiety, had contributed to her vulnerable state. The grieving mothers are now campaigning for a greater understanding of the issue and tougher sentencing for perpetrators.
Jessica was such a bundle of fun. She was such an outgoing person. She had horses. She was the life and soul of the party. She was a very confident girl. We spoke on the phone every minute of the day, morning, noon and night, to the point of thinking, Jessie, don't ring anymore. We would talk all the time.
Yeah. And how about you, Sharon? Tell us about Chloe, what she was like as a kid.
Very hyperactive, couldn't sit still for long, would climb trees and terrify me because she'd be at the top, be frightened she'd fall. She loved music, dancing, going out. She loved the beach, she loved her family, she loved her sisters, and obviously being a young girl she liked to party. She was just a lovely girl, very respectful, had morals, she was a good girl.
Following her suicide attempt, Chloe spent several weeks in hospital before passing away with her family by her side. Chloe's partner Mark was jailed for 41 months for coercive and controlling behaviour. The court heard that during their relationship, he would regularly assault her, control her, and on one occasion encouraged her to self-harm. He was convicted using a 2-hour statement that Chloe had given to police just weeks before she died. When did you first notice changes in your relationship with her?
Once she left home, she became quite private about, her relationship. I would send her messages and somebody would read them, and then 2 days later say, why haven't you answered me? Well, I didn't see it. And then I realised she wasn't seeing them, he was controlling the phones. The first thing they do is get rid of the friends, because they're the easiest to get rid of. And then the family is a lot harder. And, he nearly managed that with the family. She was getting angry with us, we were getting angry with her, but we didn't know the situation. If we'd known everything, it would have been a different story. Oh, God, sorry.
She's your daughter.
Yeah, yeah.
And you love her.
Yeah.
And you have to sit and watch her die.
Yeah, yeah.
What did that do to your heart?
I don't know, I think I'm still in shock, to be honest with you.
Phyllis's daughter Jessica had an on-off relationship with a man Phyllis claims emotionally and violently abused her. The court heard that on one occasion, he strangled Jessica until she was unconscious. The man denies all claims made against him and was never convicted in relation to them. In a landmark moment for families in Phyllis's position, the coroner wrote to the government to call for a better understanding of the link between domestic abuse and suicide. Phyllis, can you remember a particular moment where you thought, something doesn't seem right with Jessie at the moment?
It was very difficult to pinpoint that time to a certain extent because we stopped seeing her so much. Very much similar cases, she was isolated from friends and family. But I put it down, she was just very busy in a loving relationship because they lived about 50 miles away. So I just thought she was getting on with life and enjoying the life with this new partner. And so it wasn't until the police called me when she'd been strangled till unconscious that I realised that this had been going on. It was just such a shock. And I asked her why she hadn't told me, but she said, I didn't want you worrying because I thought I could sort it. I thought I could get out of this.
Now, you both talked about failures within services that could have perhaps helped both of your daughters. Phyllis, what more would you have liked to have seen those services do?
Although the perpetrator abused her, the professionals failed to protect her. Any professional curiosity, who was the perpetrator, what was the injuries, what was happening, are you safe? Nobody asked, was she suicidal? She'd been strangled till unconscious. She was high risk. They can't see that link between domestic abuse and suicide, and that's what they have to acknowledge, because my daughter wanted to live, but she didn't want to live the life of domestic abuse. She was brave enough to flee, like everybody says, leave the area. She did that, but the ex-services weren't there to protect her. We're only ever going to know a fraction of what the figures are, because there's going to be people that will never know that that person was in a domestic abuse relationship. But if we start to collate figures, I think we'll be ashamed at how long we've left it before we've really done something.
I've come to meet Domestic Abuse Commissioner Nicole Jacobs. In her role, Nicole is able to make recommendations to the government about how they should tackle issues relating to domestic abuse. How important do you think it is that we recognise that link between suicide and domestic abuse?
Those links are emerging, but just on a basic human level, domestic abuse is distressing. It's awful to live through. It's isolating. Our responses are not as good as they could and should be. And that leads people to feel pretty helpless and hopeless. And we have to do absolutely everything we can to combat that.
Now, you did your Shifting the Scales report earlier on this year, which highlighted many failures and many gaps within the system. What would you say were the main recommendations from that?
Victims reach out to the police. They have to have the best of responses. So we have 43 forces in England and Wales. You can find pockets of really excellent practice, but the trouble is that's not consistent throughout. We should have resources that help not just the police, but at that very first point of contact, what are the kinds of services that victims should be signposted to, those services who should be working kind of hand in hand with the police.
Are we ever going to see a system that is joined up together that can help victims and survivors?
Victims of domestic abuse sometimes don't even use that term in the earliest stages, so it's really up to the kind of confidence of all of us, but particularly frontline services, to be able to start recognizing some of these signs. We use this term everyone's business, but it really has to be.
Now, Phyllis, who you saw in that film there, I'm really pleased to say, has joined us in the studio today alongside her granddaughters. Thank you, Phyllis, so much for talking to us, and thank you so much for being here on the show with us today. Thank you.
To the Home Office for a comment about the things we discussed with Sharon and Phyllis, and I've got the reply here from Jess Phillips, who is the Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls Minister. She says, "My heart goes out to the families of Jessica Laverick and Chloe Holland. We have asked the Law Commission to conduct a wholesale review of the law of homicide, including the use of manslaughter charges when someone may tragically be driven to suicide following abuse. Tackling this issue is a core part of our mission to halve violence against women and girls in a decade, and I will not stop until we achieve change." And I know Jess, and I know that she feels incredibly strongly about this subject and has a long history of supporting legal moves on it. Cherie, I mean, it's clear that more needs to be done to help families like Phyllis and Sharon's, but in particular with this link to suicide.
It's not surprising when you think about it, because the whole point about this kind of controlling behaviour is to make the victim feel helpless, powerless, and that's a real key indicator of suicide. So that's very important. Refuge did a survey, and 24% of the women that they spoke to had, in fact, thought about suicide, and 18% had actually taken some steps to do something about it. So it's a serious, serious problem. And thank God for the coroner for actually raising the matter.
Yeah, indeed.
And thank God for battling mothers, by the way.
Yes, no, absolutely.
You know, battling mums, I think, could probably end up changing the world like you, Phyllis. You know, it's incredible.